Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Dave Gristeel. I'm the county's housing director, and I'm excited to help us kick off. Is this our second or third annual Affordable Housing Month? September has become the month to celebrate our collective efforts to preserve and create affordable housing that helps the county achieve its vision of a diverse, inclusive, and sustainable urban community. I know it's longer than that, but I'll keep it short. Helping our people, strengthening our economies, and building our communities. We're especially excited this September because in a short couple of weeks and an even shorter couple of days, we'll be back in this room discussing the county's vision for affordable housing between now and 2040. If we're successful at the end of that meeting, which I think we will based on last night's work session, the board will adopt the Affordable Housing Master Plan. This is the county's vision that sets us on the path for the next 25 years to achieve affordable housing, both rental and ownership, also to help increase access to that housing and to make that housing more sustainable for the community. So today's kickoff sets us up for a month full of events, including the September board meeting. There'll be a short program, then please stay on and stay for the reception just outside this room. So first on the agenda, we've produced a series of short public service announcements that hopefully most of you have seen, but just to remind you to see them again, which highlight some of the ways in which affordable housing policies make a difference in people's lives. I want to thank the interviewees and thanks to Arlington AVN, Arlington's cable channel Enjoy. And then finally, before we get started, I want to recognize we've got County Board Member Tejada's here with us. Staff throughout the room have helped us, so thanks for that. We've got some working group members, Catherine Scruggs and Dave Liebson and Linda Kelleher. Any other working group members I've forgotten, staff? Oh, Mary, I'm gonna get to her. But visitors welcome. So it's really a pleasure to be able to, it's an honor to be able to welcome you to this event. So now I'd like to welcome Mary Hynes, who's Arlington County Board Chair, to make some opening remarks. A bit later on the program, she's going to read the proclamation proclaiming September's Affordable Housing Month. Ms. Hynes has been on a county board member since 2007, which means she's been here about 8 years, and she's been on the school board 12 years before that. Has lived in Arlington for more than 35 years and has got 5 kids who graduated from Arlington Public Schools. And I think from my perspective, I know, a couple of things Mary's helped, at least from the affordable housing perspective on, is certainly in terms of how we talk about it. This notion of the head, heart, and wallet and variations of that. And I think because of that initial message, I think a lot of us have taken that language on. At least I know I have my own way of describing that, but I think that's been really helpful, particularly in this issue that's been, we've had a tradition of doing affordable housing, and I think it's been relatively easy, but I think over the time, in some ways it's gotten more difficult, and that's not unique now. I think it was difficult 15 years ago, back when Mr. Tejada was involved in the Yarna Valley struggle, but I think it's particularly gotten in more, and I think Chris will touch on this in his comments, that as a place like Arlington becomes more desirable because of the good infrastructure, because of the transportation network, because of the schools, the parks, all these wonderful things that make this a great place, it puts a lot of pressure on affordable housing. And so now that the way to achieve affordable housing is through resources, both planning resources and financial resources. But those resources and that need for affordable housing is not in isolation. It's in the context of need for more schools, more parks. We've got a vacancy rate in the office market we've got to figure out. So there's a lot of competing interests and again competition over space that make affordable housing a challenge. And I really do appreciate Ms. Hynes' efforts and Mr. Tejada's efforts as well, because they've helped us get to a place where, again, a couple weeks and a couple days, we're probably going to adopt a master plan that's really going to set us forward for the next 25 years. So thanks. And Ms. Hynes, we got some comments for you.
So thanks, David, and so nice to see so many people here today. We did have quite an evening last night talking about the bits and pieces of the plan, and we are in a spot I'm really pleased about, actually. So, as David said, we're here to kick off Affordable Housing Month, and we're going to celebrate our efforts in a variety of ways over the next month to remind us all that we're trying to make our vision of a diverse, inclusive, world-class urban community a reality for all kinds of people from all backgrounds at all ages and stages of their lives. That's what makes Arlington the great place that it really is today. I know that I don't have to say very much to the folks in this room about why affordable housing matters. You're here because you know that. And David quickly ran through sort of the three things we've been saying. You know, affordable housing supports our people. It supports individuals. It also improves our neighborhoods. And we know from our business community that it has a role to play in why businesses decide to come to Arlington, the availability of good workers and housing that they can afford altogether. We've been really lucky that since 1988, we've had the foresight to invest in affordable housing, and our investments have grown over the years. It's not enough, but we are doing a lot more than a lot of other communities are doing. We're a little over 5% of our general fund budget is committed to affordable housing efforts in one way or another. Talking just a little bit about what we're doing this year in 2016, our fiscal year 2016, we have $12.5 million set aside in our budget to do the bricks and mortar development partner, where we leverage $3 for every dollar we put in to make more affordable housing here in the community or to preserve that which exists. We also have the only locally funded housing grant program that I'm aware of in this region, and we put $8.9 million of our money in to support families. The average family gets a grant that's about $500 a month, so about $6,000 a year, actually fairly modest to help a family be able to stay in safe, good housing. We couple that with about twice as much from the federal government, about $17 million. And so more than 1,300 households here in Arlington get some sort of rental assistance. About a third of those folks are folks that I would think of as elderly. At the end of their lives, they're not really going to increase their earning power. Many of them are on fixed incomes. Another third of them are people who are disabled one way or another, and they too have pretty constrained earning potential moving forward. So to me, those 2/3 of the folks, they're going to be with us all the time. And as a caring, inclusive community, we need to figure out how we help people who hit those moments in their lives or who are born with those inabilities to have a great, productive life here in our community. The other third are working families. And for a lot of those folks, they stay on our housing grant program 3 to 4 years. I think of it as a hand up. It's somebody has a baby, or there's a medical situation in a family, or someone loses a job. This housing grant program gives them the space to figure out how they're going to move forward, how they're going to get back into a part of the world where they can, in fact, have control of their own destiny and not need our assistance. And I think that, too, is a really great thing, and our community should be proud about it. The sad part of our story really is that we've lost, we laughed about this last night. We didn't really lose them, they're not missing. But about 13,500 apartments have become unaffordable to people since 2000 in our community. Mostly because of rising rents, a little bit because of condo conversion. But so we used to have about 23,000 units that were affordable to people at 60% of area median income. We're down about 10,000. So we've lost about half overall of our population. We're down to 10,000. Our plan would hopefully get us back to where we were in the year 2000, and we think that's an important thing for us to do. So as David has said, you know, we're all kind of looking to September 19th, which is Saturday. Saturday board meeting here in September. It'll be the first item on our agenda, and we believe that this master plan really will break new ground. It says we're going to work in 3 ways. We're going to preserve and protect that which we already have, where we already have affordability. We want to do what we can to maintain it. It says we're going to take our smart growth principles, our understanding of transit-oriented development, and use our land use and zoning tools to try to leverage them to create a better mix of housing affordability in places where we currently don't have it. And it finally says, since about 80% of our land is actually zoned mostly single family, that we have to figure out some tools that allow families to invite someone else in, to age gracefully in a small unit while renting their bigger house, or vice versa, bring a caregiver in, so that that part of our geography also helps meet what is a really important challenge. I have 5 kids in that 30-something range, so I live the question every day of where's my safe place to live and how can I put down roots and will I ever be able to afford something? And my kids know that if they can find a community like Arlington, even if they stay a renter, they can put down roots and they can be part of their community. And I'm really excited to be part of setting up the next 20 years of this conversation here in Arlington. So I'm really glad you're here today. I know most of you will participate in one or another of the various things that either the county's doing or that our nonprofits are doing over the next 30 days. This is a good time to be in Arlington. We are facing challenge, as David said, lots of challenge, but with challenge comes opportunity. And creative, good people see the opportunity even in the challenge and figure out how to make it work for the future. And I know that's what we're about. So I'm really, really pleased. So I think I turn it back to you, David. Thank you all again. And, more details are on the website. And tell your friends and neighbors we're getting close. Thanks.
Thanks, Chairman Hynes. Thank you. For those who are following in our program, I skipped a step. We've got some affordable housing videos that we're gonna show first, and then I'll introduce Chris Estes, who will give us a national perspective on affordable housing. Thanks.
I think we just need to look at affordable housing being across the spectrum. I think in our business, in the real estate business, I often talk about it as workforce housing. So we need it at every strata.
Service workers or clerical folks, having those folks live close to their jobs is better for the employers. It cuts down on transportation time. So we think in that way it helps the economy as well.
These people that are school teachers and work at the fire department or police department or simply going to graduate school and have one income, they should be afforded the same opportunities to live in places like this.
It's good to have different kind of people.
If we really want a diverse community, we've got to have a range of housing choices that enable people with a wide range of incomes and backgrounds to stay here.
You learn from other people. If you are in the same level of the money or of culture or something, you're not going to learn anything. So it's good to have that kind of...
This is the thing that you can find in Arlington County.
We should find a way in a civilized society to find a way for people to live.
Part of what makes this community really strong is it's got a good network and track record and history of working with a lot of different developers who want to provide affordable housing.
And the affordable housing resides in this building. If you walk through and do a tour, they don't look any different than any other units. And those people are then given the opportunity to live in an active mixed-use environment like this.
The area is always expensive.
It's a very big challenge.
We've got households that come here, they're looking for a place to own or rent, and they've got kids and they know this is a good place to stay, but they see a shrinking supply of affordable housing, and so we're trying to figure out ways to help them get into it.
Arlington Mill was one of the good opportunity for us to pay lower rents and be in good school.
The thing I like most about being in Arlington is this is home.
You hear about people that, they've got their house, they raise their family, their kids move away, and they've got this house, and they're concerned with how are they going to be able to stay here, are they going to be able to afford it, and so we're looking, how are they going to age in place?
I look for the porch light on. I look for the key that fits in the door. And I'm home at the end of a work day.
Again, thanks to Arlington AVN for helping us put these together, and thanks to folks, Mr. Shushan and APA and the tenants that participated in this. So now I want to introduce, my pleasure to introduce Chris Estes. Chris is the president of the National Housing Conference. He began his tenure there in July 2012, coming from North Carolina. He's going to give you a little bit more detail about that. Prior to that, he was in North Carolina, where he led the North Carolina Housing Coalition for more than 9 years, and he led the organization's strategic direction for its policy. He's got experience in community organizing, affordable housing development, and credit syndication, as well as programs that serve residents in affordable housing communities. He's written about the linkage between affordable housing programs and transportation, housing and public health, and worked on issues for foreclosure prevention for housing for those with disabilities. He's a graduate of University of North Carolina, like myself. In fact, that's where I met Chris we both had a relationship with a developer down there. We provided the financing for them, and Chris worked for them. So Chris is a Carolina buddy, and so it's glad to welcome you back north. A lot of us go south, but some of us come back north. So Chris is part of that movement. So Chris, welcome.
Thank you, David. And thank you all for being here. It's my pleasure to get to speak to you all this evening. As David mentioned, I came here from North Carolina, where all of my housing work was really at the state and local level. And although everybody who works on affordable housing issues comes to Washington to do advocacy and education on funding, but when you come to a national organization, you get to do a lot of really interesting things. And particularly, I've enjoyed getting to learn what's happening in different parts of the country and meet all the folks doing this work and see the great innovations that are happening. But you don't get to do a lot of meetings like this, where you really get to spend time with efforts and folks who are really working on the ground that are going to have transformative impact for their communities. And so it's a lot of fun for me to get to sort of come back and do these kind of meetings and support this kind of work. The National Housing Conference is actually the oldest housing organization in the country. We were formed in 1931 in New York City in the Depression, and it was an interesting merger of white male developers who were desperate to build during the height of the Depression and a bunch of women advocates who were concerned about the slum conditions in New York City. And they came together to challenge New York City and New York State to do more about housing issues, and then quickly move to Washington, D.C. To then take that same kind of message forward. Historically, NHC has been almost solely focused on federal housing policy. And when I came 3 years ago, part of my sort of negotiation with the board was that I felt like it was really important for us to be as equally balanced on issues that were happening at the regional, state, and local level, because that's really where the innovations and opportunities are right now in housing and community development. There is, unfortunately, not a lot that we can look to Congress for in terms of changing the landscape for us. We are doing the best we can to sort of hang on to what we have, but it's not a place where there's much opportunity for innovation in a resource-scarce environment. And so it really is, it's been a shift for us in our strategic planning and how we've organized our staff to that we are equally focused in our communications work, our research work, and our policy work, both federal and regional, state, and local. It's important for us to work on and be connected to efforts like this because it really helps us understand the process that communities go through. And I'll talk a little more at the end about that, but again, plans are roadmaps, they are statements of values, but they are also public community conversations. What do we want? How do we understand and come together in a common understanding about what our community needs, what we value? And there are probably only a few terms as loaded as the words affordable housing, and that's why that public conversation is so important. The topic of this work, why affordable housing matters, is in many ways answered by the plan itself. It really outlines, I think, very effectively through the work of the study group and the working group, the thinking around why we believe affordable housing is so important to our future. And you heard about that a little bit earlier. When I got started in housing, as David mentioned, I actually went back to graduate school to get a master's in social work in community practice and planning, and was working in a low-income community in Carborough, North Carolina, which is sort of the other side of the tracks from Chapel Hill in a university town. And all the community I worked in was 40% Latino renters and 60% African American homeowners. And everybody had an issue with housing, but social work had really moved away, even though it started in a housing focus, really with the Hull House in Chicago and Jane Addams working on housing and community issues. And so I went to get a master's in city regional planning sort of at the same time and overlapped those 2 degrees. And so for me, when we began our work in North Carolina, I was trying to figure out how do we talk about this issue and how do we make the case of why housing matters. And I didn't do PowerPoint tonight because I didn't want you guys to start falling asleep right away. But the one slide that I developed that I still use to this day is in early PowerPoint crude graphics, this basically saying that housing is the hub of a wheel. And all these issues that we spend a lot of time talking about in our community, typically education, transportation, open space, older adults, persons with disabilities, homelessness, economic development, all of those issues tend to, not so much in this community because your housing prices have really forced housing forward more, but in typical communities, those dominate the public discussion much more than affordable housing does. And we were really trying to help people see that what you live in and where you live inexorably connects all of those issues. If you can't live near your employment, where jobs and opportunities and services are, your life and quality of life is much more difficult. If the place you can afford to live is substandard and makes you sick, no matter how well we do with helping you access health care, you are not going to have a healthy life and your children will not have a healthy life. And so those kind of intersections between those issues are why I sort of working on housing issues became central to me, and why I think they're so important for the public conversation, because unless you've lost your housing and you're homeless, or you're acutely aware of how expensive and that you may be priced out of housing, it's not an issue that folks always think about. We often, people have asked me all the time, like, why are we having such trouble conveying the rental affordability crisis that this country is in right now? And I do believe that is changing. The public discourse in most growing cities in this country are following the path that you all are on, which is a much more aggressive, forward-thinking planning on how do we manage the changes that have hit us, how do we manage this growth, and how do we deal with a cost structure that is dangerously close to pricing a lot of people out of our community. And that, so I do believe that is changing. But the how housing, the hub of the wheel frame for us at NHC has shifted a little bit, and now we tend to talk about housing intersections a lot. And some of you know Dr. Lisa Sturdivant. She worked previously at the George Mason Institute for Regional Analysis. She now heads up our research at NHC at the Center for Housing Policy. Lisa has outlined with her staff a sort of 4-pronged agenda for us, and I thought it was interesting that it really sort of followed many of the things in your plan. We look at the analysis of housing needs and affordability. Our housing intersections work looks at the intersection between housing and health, housing and education, and housing and employment. And the most dominant frame for education and employment are around stability. And that something that you all outlined yourselves. The research shows over and over again, families that can't access affordable housing have to move more often. It is more difficult for them, for their kids to do well in school, or for them to obtain stable employment. And again, it took a while for folks to really hone in on that issue, and it's great that you all have identified it. And then we look at issues of housing demand. Where is the growth coming from? What does it look like? And you all are lucky to be in a community that is challenged by that. There are many places in this country where I have spent time and spoken where folks are, the conversation is very different. It's how do we keep our young people from leaving? How do we get businesses to move here? We wish we had traffic congestion. I don't think anyone wants to trade DC's traffic for theirs, but it is a challenge that I think all the folks in this region are happy to have when they really think about it. You would rather be in a place that is a desirable place to live, that folks want to move to. That is not to say that it's not easy, because particularly if you've been here for a while, seeing your community change, seeing it grow, is difficult. Things will not stay the same. But you have, when you do great planning and thoughtful planning and forward-thinking planning, you have the ability to shape that growth and change and ensure that the values and elements that why you love your community will still be there 25 years from now. It's sort of humbling to, when you were reading those dates, I thought, wow, I'm going to be 75 years old when that plan is complete. But in many ways, that's really the power of it. I had an experience a couple days ago. I went to a funeral of one of my colleagues. Their father passed away, and funerals are difficult things, but they are incredibly beneficial, I think, for us, because you really have to examine what's really important. When you get to that sort of end-of-life discussion of what people are celebrating about someone's life, and you think, really all the fluff and distraction of life sort of gets separated. And I think when you do planning, it's a similar kind of process. You have to really focus. It's easy to talk about what's in front of us right now, and it's hard for people to think about 25 years from now. But that plan is your legacy. For all the folks that are involved in it. It is, some of us may not be here physically or may not live in this community anymore, but that will be your legacy, the thing that you have left behind as to what kind of community Arlington's going to be. And I think what I was most impressed with was really the thought that you all put into things like inclusivity and sustainability, and that it was not just about units, but about people. And that's what we spend a lot of time talking to folks about, and I'll close with that a little bit. So I really want to congratulate the staff and all of you involved. It's a tremendous leadership opportunity, and as David noted, we do spend time talking to a lot of folks, and there is a lot of really interesting planning going on right now. Some communities like San Francisco and New York are at a stage where they're in almost crisis mode. How do we manage this, knowing that in some ways we've already lost the battle? San Francisco in particular has become a community where you essentially have a small number of low-income folks who can get access to affordable units, and then unbelievably expensive housing. People paying $50,000 a year in rent is not uncommon, and it's almost hard. I keep thinking that's a misprint, but the data is true. And so it isn't just San Francisco's challenge, though. It's all the communities around it that bear the brunt of those housing challenges, and that's why regional thinking is so important. The district has obviously become a very popular place to move, and I was certainly part of that 3 years ago. And we live in the city. Ourselves just became empty nesters and could take advantage of that. But it is the challenge of Arlington and Alexandria and Fairfax and Montgomery County and Prince George's County and all the folks in this region to be doing the kind of thinking that you all are doing, because it won't rely on Washington solving its own problems alone, both figuratively and literally. And it will take each group doing this kind of forward-looking planning to help them build off that as people see that sort of sustainable transit-oriented vision that becomes a model for other communities. And I'm excited that we're actually bringing a network of these folks together, and David will be a part of that, from across the country to spend 2 years in sort of a peer learning network to really share how these communities are doing this work with each other and help us develop models that other localities can look at and say, here's how folks in the trenches doing this work have come up with strategies and ideas that you can take and work with and think about how to adapt to your community. So that's something we hope will really benefit all of us in the long run. I mentioned the sort of the other part of housing, which is really the quality of life element, and it's really where the most important community thinking happens. It's very easy for people, if you're not having the right kind of conversation, to assume that this work is for someone else. These are for units for someone else. It's not for me. And in fact, one of the things that we've spent a lot of time doing is working on communications efforts to help people use better language when talking about the issues of affordability, the solutions to it, and the public conversation that happens in that. And one of the great evidences of that is that in a lot of polling that's been done in various places, low-income people were not supportive of some affordable housing efforts in their community because they used words like low income. And most people don't actually self-identify as low income. No one says I'm a low-income senior and therefore this is for me. And so they all thought it was for someone else. And so we have to, it's really important how people feel included in this plan, valued, that it's not just for someone who's disadvantaged, but it's for our community to be a more successful, vibrant place, a community of opportunity for all. And I think that's, again, you have that language in there, and I think it's really important as you all go forward that that dialogue sort of continue, that people can see how giving access to workers access to housing near employment and giving employers access to workers is something that benefits all of us. And not just from an employment standpoint, but from a transportation network. If everybody, one of the things that I learned really quickly in my previous job, North Carolina does not have a great tradition of public transportation. And in many communities that had become quite affluent, particularly retirement communities, there was an active effort to keep affordable housing out. You know, it was the other people, we don't want those folks here. A lot of people who had retired in North Carolina, we call them halfbacks, people who had moved to Florida and they came halfway back from the Northeast. And it was not a pejorative term, it was just because you would see all these Florida license plates all over the mountains and folks who spent half their time in North Carolina and half in Florida. But they were often not really in support of any public investments, both in education or in housing, because it was sort of, they didn't see what was in it for them. And it really is, what was interesting is those communities, when gas hit $4 a gallon back in the sort of late 2000s, I was getting calls from the Chamber of Commerce of those towns saying, you've got to help us figure out how to get some affordable housing here. We have no child care workers and we have no one to work. Our school teachers all took other jobs because it wasn't worth driving, because nobody lived in the county. They all lived a county away. And so they weren't willing to make those drives anymore. And so it really hit home for a group of folks who hadn't necessarily been predisposed to that. And while that's a different analogy to Arlington, it is a similar construct. The value of you being able to keep your workforce in the county is a powerful one, because it's not just about your traffic congestion, it's about where people spend their money. And we did some detailed research looking at folks who commute in and out of communities to different locations. and they overwhelmingly spend their money where they live versus where they work. And so you want to be an employment center, and you want to take advantage of that benefit of having businesses here and successful retail, and a lot of that will require a low to moderate wage workforce that wouldn't be able to afford to live here without this intervention. I said that the plan is a statement of values and a roadmap, and that it's also a public conversation. I encourage you, as you go forward, to sort of engage folks in the things that you have set up from here, and as you work to implement the plan, to really emphasize these intersections of public benefit, how this impacts the health of the folks who live in your community, how it impacts their education of their children, how it impacts the quality of life and the employment opportunities. It is really easy to talk about housing in terms of units, and it's important to educate folks on we lost or 13,000 units are no longer affordable. I make that same, we lost, they're vanished. And that we need to build, we have a 7,500 unit shortage. But the danger is that units just sound very impersonal. And for all of you and for all the folks who are going to watch this at some point late at night or when they can't sleep, and for those of us who are going to be engaged in this plan, the people have to be front and center. Those are the values that your plan calls you to, and those are the values that your community has embraced historically. And I think that's what makes Arlington such a special and unique place. And it is special and unique. I don't mean that in sort of a empty platitude. There are not a lot of places that have been as thoughtful as you all have about your diversity and your inclusivity, and planning for that for the future. Thinking about how do we create a more sustainable community that also includes people of different incomes. Unfortunately, a lot of the sustainability work that happened in this country early on led to a lot of gentrification and displacement unintentionally, because people weren't really thinking it through, and it took a lot of work between the affordable housing community development folks and the smart growth community and transportation folks to recognize that when you extend transportation networks, that creates a lot of desirability for location. And that can create density, which is great, but it can also create a lot of price pressure. You don't have to look much further than the price of housing in this general region by how far it is from the metro. It was, I think, most telling long before I moved here, but in the foreclosure crisis, the price of homes that you could buy during the foreclosure crisis was dramatically different in this region, depending on where you were from the metro. And that was, I remember listening to an NPR story about that, and we kept using that when we were trying to get Charlotte to do public transportation and why they should think about it. So again, I want to thank you all for your great work. I want to congratulate you, especially the staff, for your support and guidance of this. I really look forward. We are eager to support you all and other communities around the district and the district itself as you all work to help meet the housing needs of both current and future residents. I look forward to following and supporting the adoption and implementation of your plan and providing whatever assistance we can going forward. So thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Hopefully that tied it together. Now the last part of our program is Chairman Hynes has the proclamation, if you'll come and read it. And then after that, we'll more refreshments out front, and of course you're welcome to stay and gather and talk.
It won't be quite so smelly in the lobby, so don't feel embarrassed about leaving the room. So it's my great pleasure to read the proclamation that we have done in the last several Septembers in support of Affordable Housing Awareness Month. So here we go. Whereas it is the vision of Arlington County to ensure an economically and culturally diverse, inclusive, and sustainable community. And whereas ongoing access to affordable housing at all income levels in the form of both rental and home ownership is fundamental to maintaining healthy neighborhoods and families and stabilizing our local workforce and overall economic prosperity, allowing our entire community to reap the benefits of expanded affordable housing choices for our low and moderate income residents and workers. And whereas the County Board has adopted goals and targets for affordable housing across Arlington and pursues the preservation and creation of affordable housing through ordinances, plans, site plan approvals, publicly funded affordable housing programs, and other policies and programs. And whereas, as a caring community, the county has focused particular attention on the housing needs of our most vulnerable populations, including persons who have disabilities, persons who are homeless, and persons who are elderly. And whereas the County Board most recently allocated 5% of its annual budget to support a wide range of affordable housing programs, both helping residents obtain housing as well as preserving and increasing the supply of affordable housing, and including the effective collaboration and leveraging with local nonprofit and private partners. And whereas the county has produced a draft affordable housing master plan that outlines goals to ensure an adequate supply to meet the community's needs, access to housing and services, and sustainability of resources. Now, therefore, I, Mary Hynes, Chair of the County Board of Arlington, Virginia, do hereby proclaim the months of September 2015 as Affordable Housing Awareness Month in Arlington County, and encourage all members of the community to join with the County Board in striving for broad community understanding of the importance of affordable housing to our sustainability, reaffirming the benefits of affordable housing as a community value, and promoting affordable housing choices for all Arlingtonians. Everyone is encouraged to participate in several events this month to promote the awareness and better understanding of affordable housing in our community. So there you have it. It's proclaimed.
Thank you, Chairman Hynes. And again, those events are September 12th, there's Affordable Housing Bus Tour. That's on a Saturday. It's here from 9:15 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. On the 16th, there's a public forum, Mixed Income Housing, from 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. at the Arlington Cinema Draft House on Columbia Pike. On September 21st, there's from 6:30 to 8 p.m., there's a Resident Services and Affordable Housing information session at the Arlington Mill Community Room. On September 26th, there's the Affordable Housing Bike Tour, so all of us bikers go on a bike tour to see some units. That's from 9:30 in the morning to 11 a.m. And then on September 30th, from 5 to 8:30 p.m., there's a Lucky Forum on affordable housing, the nuts and bolts of affordable housing. It's going to be at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Arlington on Arlington Boulevard. And lest as I mentioned before, on the 19th of September, on Saturday, here in this room, there's going to be, the board is going to take up the question of adopting the Affordable Housing Master Plan and accept the implementation framework, and so we encourage people to attend and hear how that goes. So thank you for coming, and if you want to stay around, there's refreshments out in the hall, and if you got questions for Chris or Ms. Hynes or Mr. Hodder or anybody else, welcome. Thank you for coming.